Good morning. My name is Daniel Clark, and I'm the pianist here at UU. It's so nice to have the opportunity to break out of my usual role as the soft-spoken pianist and to relate to you all in a bit of a different way. And hopefully you can all get to know me a little better as a person. When I was asked to speak about my personal faith practice as an active member of the Hare Krishna community for the past 15 years or so, I felt a mix of eagerness and apprehension. For one thing, it's pretty hard to avoid the theistic element in talking about my Hare Krishna faith. And it's hard to talk about religious theology without becoming too cerebral and running the risk of alienating people. Moreover, I don't really want to be seen as a representative of an entire faith community because, let's face it, I still struggle with certain aspects of the theology myself. And I have my own personal shortcomings that I wouldn't want to reflect badly on the movement as a whole. For these reasons, I have decided to simply tell my own story of how I came to my current faith practice and the integral role that music and sacred sound has had in shaping my spiritual evolution through life. I will share some information in the course of this about the local Hare Krishna community, and if you're interested to know more after this talk, I can refer you to a couple of good sermons given by Unitarians that you can listen to online. One is by the Reverend Clay Nelson of the Auckland Unitarian Church, entitled, "Who is Krishna and Why Should We Care?" And another one is by Sarah Chang of the UU of Susquehanna Valley, Pennsylvania, entitled, "Connecting Krishna Consciousness to Unitarian Universalism." My story begins with Sunday mornings at Westminster United Church, where my parents were members for a time when I was very young. I don't remember a whole lot about it, but what is stuck in my mind is the creepiness of the church basement, the way the organ shook the floor, and the impression that the music made on me, which makes sense since I went on to become a church musician myself. And later in life, I did get the opportunity to play on that very same organ. My other experience with church in childhood was a brief stint as a choir boy at St. George's Anglican Church. Again, the music made a profound impact on me, but I remember pretty much nothing about the theology. The music alone was not enough to motivate me to persevere as a choir boy, so for the rest of my youth, I had no involvement with organized religion, save for the occasional Easter or Christmas Eve service. Looking back, I can see that for the first 25 years of my life, my religion or my spiritual practice was music, though I wouldn't have described it in these terms at the time. Performing a piano piece was a profoundly spiritual experience for me, a meditation of sorts and an act of devotion and surrender. It called me to be fully present in the moment, to let go of my ego, to give my full body to the activity and my ears to the sound coming from the instrument. I had no idea of it then, but I see now that the art of piano performance was a continual practice of cultivating these spiritual skills of letting go and being present. When I did manage to let go, there was often something quite magical and beautiful that happened. One dramatic example of that was a practice performance I did of a rather complicated piece by César Franck for a fellow piano student. No sooner had I played the final chords, I was overcome by a wave of emotion that left me sobbing for a few minutes before I could regain my composure. No doubt, my unhealthy emotional and mental state at the time was partly the cause of that outburst, but it was the deep qualities of the music that brought the emotion out of me. So this is a good segue into what brought me from being an agnostic with no religious affiliation whatsoever to where I am now, a fairly committed and enthusiastic member of what I would describe as a unapologetically theist or God-centered faith tradition. Due to a variety of factors, my mental and emotional health declined throughout my time in university to the point when to the point that when I graduated from my master's program at the University of South Florida in 2007, I was an emotional wreck, seeing a psychiatrist and taking antidepressant medication to help me manage my chronic anxiety and depression. I returned home to Winnipeg, but my life spiraled down into what seemed like a life and death battle with disordered eating that deeply scared my family members. Whether I actually was close to death at that time, I'll never know for sure. But when I hear about the experiences of people who have had near-death experiences, I relate to the sense of profound paradigm shift and spiritual awakening that many of them describe. During this time that my life was out of control, I had many experiences that showed me that something else, something bigger, something much bigger than me was in control, and I was not alone. I was still able to hold down a job as a pianist and an organist at various different Christian churches, wherever I could get a job. And it wasn't hard given my musical qualifications. I was there to earn a living, not because I believed their theology, but there I was, a captive member, a captive listener during Sunday sermons, and I began to have this desire to understand the God thing better. The idea of a personal relationship with God, although intriguing to me, was ephemeral and hard to reconcile with a rationalist worldview. But I was quite sure that I wanted relationships with people, and I didn't know how to get there. All during this time, I was going through a phase of sampling different spiritual teachings and reading everything under the sun that interested me, including Buddhism and New Age spirituality, but never really landing anywhere. However, as soon as I was somewhat recovered from my illness, I felt fired up with a desire to find somewhere that I could ask deeper questions about life. That's when I met Vrinda. In a health food store, I had seen a little brochure advertising something called Bhakti Yoga, and I decided to check it out. I found myself in a house in Wolseley where Vrinda Devidasi was hosting Bhakti Yoga gatherings in her home. I knew what yoga was because I had been going to yoga classes for several years, so I was interested to see what this was all about. Well, it turned out that Bhakti Yoga was mostly meant singing mantras in call and response fashion, or what's known as kirtan. To say that my first experience with kirtan was comforting seems insufficient, but I don't know how else to describe it. So I will quote from the author Pranada Kamtwa, who beautifully describes her first experience with kirtan in her book, Prema Kirtan. Quote, "The music and lyrics of the songwriters of my youth spoke to me and were meaningful. But mantra and kirtan were something that went way beyond music. Music had eased me, but kirtan transported me to an inner connection with myself and what I sensed was divinity." End quote. My first experience with kirtan in Vrinda's living room gave me a profound sense that I had finally found what I was looking for, and I wanted to learn as much as I could about the tradition. I came with my questions, and Vrinda graciously answered all of them beyond my expectations. I found Vrinda to be just about the nicest and most knowledgeable person I had ever met, and very happy to answer all of my questions, even the awkward ones, and there was a few of those. I have found in getting to know Vrinda that she's very attuned to meeting people where they're at, with no expectations or strings attached. The type of kirtan that I learned from Vrinda centers around one mantra in particular. If you walk into a Hare Krishna temple today, you will undoubtedly hear the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra being sung over and over and over and over and over. And you may legitimately ask, why did they sing this one mantra incessantly? To understand the answer, you have to go back to 16th century India when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, a great saint who is often called the father of the modern-day Kirtan movement, was teaching the philosophy of Kirtaniya Sadahari, constant chanting of the Maha Mantra as the easiest and surest path to spiritual enlightenment. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu led huge kirtan parties through the streets, attracting thousands of followers through his infectious joy and magnetic power of the chanting. To this day, ISKCON temples reenact this tradition on a daily basis with lively kirtans that focus almost exclusively on the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. The spirit that drove Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was one of compassion for the suffering condition of humanity and a desire to give spiritual enlightenment to everyone regardless of skin color or status in life. To quote Bhaktivinoda Thakur, another great saint in the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition, which the modern Hare Krishna movement grew out of, quote, "The religion preached by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is universal and not exclusive. The principle of kirtan, as the future church of the world, invites all classes of men, without distinction of caste or clan, to the highest cultivation of the spirit." Thanks to Vrinda Devidasi's great sensitivity and skill in teaching newcomers, the religious and ritualistic elements of this ancient tradition, which can be hard for Westerners like me to relate to, did not present obstacles for my having a positive experience with kirtan, with the mantra, and developing friendships with devotees. I feel lucky in that sense. And for most people, I wouldn't really recommend walking into a Hare Krishna temple unannounced, as it is quite possible to become overwhelmed or put off by a lot of the practices that are hard to understand or relate to. Understanding this problem that many Westerners can have and that can be an obstacle to accessibility in our North American culture, there have been a number of initiatives launched in recent years by Hare Krishna devotees with the aim of bridging the gap and allowing the benefits of kirtan to be shared with everyone. Take, for example, Kirtan Vancouver. KVAN, as it's known for short, is a new initiative run by Hare Krishna devotees, but was incorporated separately from the main ISKCON organization in order to take the practice of Krishna Kirtan into yoga studios and allow people to engage with the music and the mantra without having to ascribe to the belief system and without being overwhelmed or spooked by all the extra stuff that one may encounter in the temple. Another obstacle that can come up, and did for me, is all of the perhaps misinformation that one encounters in the popular media. It wasn't until I had been an active member for at least several months, maybe even a year or more, that I became aware of some of the scandals or controversies that marred the early days of ISKCON and created a mixed public perception of the movement. I have come to understand that ISKCON, although rooted in a very ancient tradition, is a relatively new organization that is undergoing maturation at different rates in different parts of the world. Like all faith traditions, it has pockets of extremist or fundamentalist followers, while the vast majority of adherents are quite moderate and balanced in their approach. The latter has certainly been my experience with the devotees that I've met and gotten to know. It was also helpful to learn that in the Bhagavad Gita, one of the main scriptures in the ISKCON tradition, Sri Krishna says to Arjuna at the end, quote, "Thus have I explained to you knowledge still more confidential. Deliberate on this fully, and then do what you wish to do." The founder of the Hare Krishna movement, the modern Hare Krishna movement, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, or Srila Prabhupada as he's affectionately known by his followers, put this sloka into practice by encouraging his disciples to be independently thoughtful. He never asked anyone to turn off their brains and accept the teachings of Bhagavad Gita on blind faith. He was known to refer to the teachings as a spiritual science in which one must employ one's full reasoning and intellectual faculties to arrive at a mature understanding and know how to apply the principles correctly in our day-to-day lives. In retrospect, I'm very grateful that I didn't have any preconceived idea about ISKCON as an organization when I started attending kirtans, because it allowed me to focus on relationships instead of organizational politics. As I said earlier, relationship building was one of my biggest motivators in seeking a spiritual community, and you can't do that in a place where you feel emotionally unsafe. Recently at ISKCON Manitoba's annual Ratha Yatra festival just last weekend at the Maples Community Center, I was approached by a Free Press reporter that was there covering the event, perhaps noticing that I was one of only a handful of white people in a large crowd of East Indians. he asked me what drew me to this event and this community in the first place. And if you're interested to read that article, I think it's posted in the foyer. In that moment, it was hard to come up with the right words to answer that question, which enormously frustrated me at the time. But afterwards, I was thinking, maybe it's not so odd that I was at a loss for words, because what drew me to this practice and this community was something I not so much grasped with the verbal part of my brain as felt intuitively in my body and soul. Whether it was the chills that went up and down my spine when I first heard the Hare Krishna mantra, or the special experience of tasting prasadam, which is food that has been sanctified through ritual, or the hypnotic beat of the mridanga and kartal drums, or the ecstatic dancing that often accompanies kirtan, these were all experiences that I could enter into and leave my mind at the door, which, given the troubled nature of my mind, was often quite a relief. There's also this little fact that I would be remiss in mentioning in a talk about music and sacred sound. Krishna, the principal deity of the Hare Krishna faith, is always depicted holding a flute and is described as an expert musician and dancer. I had spent a big chunk of my time in music school working with flautists, and then later I got a job accompanying ballet classes at the RWB school. So I couldn't help but feel that my musical education had been, in some way, a preparation for the real spiritual education that I was to receive later on. I think also the ancientness of this tradition has been a fascination for me. The fact that all of these spiritual practices are rooted in what is considered the oldest religion in the world, Hinduism, although the word religion is more of a Western concept or lens that we use to look at it. For Hindus themselves, and Hindu is a bit of a misnomer as well, for Hindus, they look at it as a way of life. A term that Hindus, including Hare Krishnas, often use to refer to themselves is Sanatan Dharma, which can be translated as eternal order or eternal way. According to Wikipedia, quote, the word dharma comes from the Sanskrit root dir, which means to sustain or that which is integral to something. For example, the dharma of sugar is to be sweet. The dharma of fire is to be hot. So Sanatan Dharma is concerned with living according to our most essential nature or function as living beings. So what is our essential nature? In our UU affirmation that we sing every Sunday here are the words, "Love is the spirit of this church." Well, this is an example of Sanatan Dharma. To serve other beings with love is our purest and most essential nature because it can be practically observed that all living entities need to serve and love others in order to survive and thrive. Another way that the word dharma is used is in the context of swadharma, which means your most authentic expression of self, that action or actions that are in alignment with your psychophysical nature. I think it's safe to say that music is a big part of my swadharma, something I have been naturally drawn to since early childhood. But the practice of kirtan has helped me to take my understanding of music to a deeper level, and it has allowed me to more consciously link the activity of making music to the higher aspirations of my soul. I understand now that music and the emotions it evokes help me to connect to God, just like a river of water flows back into the great ocean. And that helps me to understand those experiences I had earlier in my life of getting swept up in the emotions of the music. I've also learned from the tradition of kirtan that what really gives life to the music is ultimately not the notes or the skill with which they're performed. It's what is in the heart of the musician. We've all witnessed what happens when a congregation of people who are not necessarily the most musically talented people connect emotionally and spiritually with a particular hymn or song that inspires them. We can have a very powerful musical experience regardless of our level of musical training, because it's not so much about the music as it is the spirit that animates it. I have certainly seen over and over again in my years as a church musician at St. Chad's Anglican Church, Messiah Lutheran Church, and now here at the UU, that music can be like a direct line to the soul. Music often reaches people in ways that words can't. My friend Susan, who was formerly the rector at St. Chad's Anglican Church, recently related an amazing anecdote to me. She used to give pastoral care to patients that have Alzheimer's or dementia, and although they couldn't remember very basic things, as soon as a hymn or song from their youth was played or sung, their faces lit up, and they were able to sing all the words to the song. It just goes to show, she said to me, the power of music, that it affects some other part of the brain that allows them to remember this old hymn or song when they couldn't remember anything else. Could well be that a song or a chant is the last thing we remember before we die. In Hindu traditions, kirtans and bhajans are sung in order to awaken feelings of devotion and love, which are said to be the natural eternal condition or swadharma of the soul. I will mention here that there are 2 traditional Hindu songs in the Grey UU hymnal, numbers 176 and 178. And I played number 178 during the prelude. Since they're in Hindi, we tend not to use them. Don't quote me on that, I think they're in Hindi. We tend not to use them in our services, but I'll just tell you that they are what would be referred to as a bhajan, B-H-A-J-A-N, which is a devotional song with lyrics that often tell a story. Kirtan, on the other hand, is usually call and response and has simpler lyrics and melodic structure to encourage communal participation. Just about done here, but I would like to say a little something about mantras. A practice that I learned early on from devotees is japa meditation, which, like kirtan, involves repetitive chanting of a mantra. However, in this case, it is done quietly to oneself in a soft-spoken voice, or it can even be done loudly or silently in one's mind. A japa mala, a string of beads similar to a rosary, can be used to keep track of the repetitions of the mantra, but one can also keep track using one's fingers. I started with 1 round of the japa mala occasionally, and over time, this practice of chanting the Hare Krishna mantra became a regular refuge for my often tired and confused mind. It has been my constant companion and friend that I can take into any situation in life, and all I need is my tongue, my mouth, and my fingers, and my vocal cords. My daily japa sessions have never failed to leave me feeling more happy, sane, and able to handle life. I think of the studies of Masaru Emoto, the Japanese research scientist, that showed how the molecular structure of water crystals that had been exposed to pleasant sounds were noticeably more aesthetically pleasing than those that had been exposed to very negative sounds. Whether these studies are scientifically sound or not has been questioned, but I have gathered a lot of experiential evidence for myself that chanting japa has exactly the same effect on my mind and emotions. The days when I do chant, my emotions feel more balanced and my thoughts more clear and organized. So just like when we tune a musical instrument, we can also tune ourselves to certain frequencies through mantra and sound vibrations that allow us to harmonize with the world around us in more positive and productive ways. So thus have I been, at least somewhat, returned to sanity through the power of mantra and music. And of course, the journey isn't over. There is always more learning to be done and more growth to be had. But it is good to recognize where you've come from and what you've been given. So I want to thank all of you for the role that you've played in my spiritual growth, and I want to thank this church for opening its doors to the Hare Krishna community in 2014, when we rented this space for a kirtan program put on by youth from around the world. I think I speak for the entire Hare Krishna community in saying that we are very grateful for the UU and other churches that have allowed us to use their space for programs, thereby helping us to grow and get to the point that we now have our own dedicated space. Finally, I want to thank my parents, members of this congregation for many years. It is from them that I first learned the values of open-mindedness, tolerance of different viewpoints, critical thought, and an independent inquiry. And it is those values that helped me to have one foot in my Christian faith and the other in the Hare Krishna faith all these years, and not to feel that there was any real conflict between these different traditions. Rather than getting hung up on external differences, I am able to see the deeper essence that underlies all of them. If there's one thing I hope to have conveyed in this talk, it's that the universal spiritual language of music, kirtan, and sacred sound have been kind of a bridge for me to walk over during a time when the turbulent waters of life threaten to drag me under. And I believe that they can also serve as a bridge between people of all different beliefs and cultures. Thank you.